Ironmoor Basin, the second month of the 15th year after the second reading of the peace. Harlan Bramwell had been sitting on the porch step since before first light with a cold cup of coffee in his hand, watching the trail come down out of the switchback because there was nothing else to watch and he had not slept. 3 days since the storm had hit the upper pasture. 3 days since he had ridden every draw and gully from the home place to the Sulphur Creek Fork and back, and had come home each evening saddle-sore and dumber for the effort. The horses were gone. 12 of them. The whole breeding string he had spent 11 years putting together, the only thing on this ranch worth the word valuable, gone into that white wall of snow and wind, and not one of them with sense or luck enough to come down on their own. He had stopped looking the evening before. Just stopped. Pulled off his boots and set them by the door, and decided that was the end of it. He did not tell himself that to sound beaten, though he was. He told himself that because a man got to a certain point where the arithmetic simply stopped working. 53 years old. Both knees shot. A border ranch that in a good year cleared enough to keep the roof sound and the taxes paid and not much else, and now no horses. The arithmetic did not work. You set your boots by the door and let it be. There is a particular quiet that comes over a place when a man stops fighting it. Harlan had felt it once before, years earlier, in the bad stretch after he had had to sell down to the studs. The land itself went still, waiting to see what the man would do, except the man had already decided, and there was nothing left to do. You just sat. The cold came in under the door. The coffee went cold in the cup. He had sat on that same step for a long time before the light came up. He watched the gray grow in the east, and he thought about practical things. What 12 head would have been worth at the spring sale down at the Concord Fairground. Whether there was a neighbor he could approach about buying breeding rights to the young stallion for one season, to get anything at all from the mares still standing in the small pasture. Whether the ranch was a going concern at all without the string. He ran the numbers in his head, and they ran badly. His wife Elise had sat in the same kitchen 22 years earlier and run numbers with him during the first bad stretch before she got sick. She had been better at numbers than he was. Steadier, she did not panic, and she did not pretend either. She would look at the thing straight and tell him what was actually there. He had learned more about his own ranch from the way she read a ledger than he had ever learned on his own. She was gone 15 winters now. And he still missed the way she read a ledger. Elise had been from the coast. She had come inland on the 5th year of the peace, when there was still work for a woman who could keep books and did not mind a rough country. She had answered a notice in a Concord bulletin that a rancher on the far side of the Ironmoor was looking for someone to sort out 3 years of tangled accounts. He had put that notice out with no expectation of a reply. She had ridden in on a hired horse with a leather satchel of pen nibs and a face that had already decided it was not going to be impressed by anything. She had read his ledger in an afternoon and had said, without looking up, "You have been paying your feedman too much for 2 years running, and your bank charges you a fee I have not seen anywhere else. And you should stop drying hay in the second lot because the drainage is wrong." He had said, "When can you start?" She had said, "I already have." They were married the following autumn. She died in the 3rd month of the 3rd year after they married of a lung fever that came through the basin like the Ironmoor did not owe anybody a warning. There had been no children. He had kept her ledger book on the corner of the desk for 15 years, in the same spot where she had left it, though he had not opened it in the last 8. That was the kind of morning it was, sitting on the step with the cold cup, thinking about numbers and about Elise and about whether 53 was too old to start over a second time. Fairly sure the answer was yes. Then he heard them. If a man had worked horses his whole life, he knew the sound without having to think about it. Hooves on rock but spread out, not one animal, not two, a whole string moving together. the particular scatter of it. He heard it before he saw anything, and his body went ahead of his mind. He was standing before he had decided to stand, the cold cup still in his hand. They came around the bend in the trail single file, bunched a little at the front where the path narrowed, and he counted them as they cleared the rock face. 1, 2, 3. He got to 8 before he stopped counting and started trying to understand what he was seeing behind them. A woman, on a gray mule. Not a horse. A mule. The kind of ugly, hard-headed mule that made the best sense in mountain country and the worst impression anywhere else. She was riding easy, not working hard, like she had been doing this all morning and expected to do it all afternoon. A duster coat that had seen weather. Hair pulled back and mostly covered by a hat that had not been sized for her, sitting low on her ears. One hand loose on the reins, the other resting on her thigh, holding a coiled rope in the way of a person who had used one before and was going to use it again. She was an orc. Harlan saw it in the light before he saw her face, the soft green-gray of the skin at the wrist above the glove, the particular carry of the shoulders. Then she turned her head, and he saw 2 small lower tusks at the corner of her mouth and the deep amber of the eyes. And he understood what he was looking at. And he stood on his porch step with the cold cup in his hand and did not move for a long moment. She drove those 12 horses right into his front yard and stopped them there as if she had been to this place before, though she had not. He could tell by the way she looked at the house. Quick, measuring, taking it in. He finished counting. 12, she looked at him. "These yours," she said. Her voice was low and even. The voice of a person who had been on the trail for hours and had not wasted words on the way. He said they were. "Found them in a box canyon up past the second ridge," she said. The big sorrel mare had herself wedged between 2 rock faces. Hind leg caught in a crack. Had to work her out slow. That is what took the morning. He did not say anything. He was still counting, which was foolish because he had already counted, but he kept doing it. "They are sound," she said. "The sorrel needs watching for a day or 2. That leg is not broken, but she was pulling against it a while before I got to her." He finally got his mouth working. "How did you know they were mine?" he said. She nodded toward the south pasture gate. There was a brand plate nailed to the post, the same mark on every animal in that string. It was not hard to figure. She swung down off the mule. She did it without ceremony, the way a person does who has been on a saddle since dawn and has stiffened into the shape of it. She led the mule to the water trough by the fence without asking where the water was. Just found it. Let the mule drink. Checked his feet while he drank, looking for stone bruising with the practical attention of someone who had grown up around animals and had never learned to think about them as anything other than what they were. She said her name was Serka Voren, and she was 29 days out of Cindervale. That was the piece of information that took Harlan longest to make sense of. 29 days. She had come south with a party of women out of the northern holds. Not a bride party, a work party. The northern holds had thinned in the last decade, more so in the last 3 years, as the young left for the barrier towns south of the Greywater, where the work was harder but the pay was regular, and no one much cared where your grandmother had lived. Serka had signed on with a group of 11 bound for the settlements along the lower Silverfoot Fork. The party had broken up at Ashgate Pass. One wagon lost a wheel beyond fixing. 2 women had turned back when the second pass showed snow. The rest had scattered to different routes depending on who they had agreed to meet and where. Serka had not been meeting anyone. She told Harlan this matter-of-factly, the way a person mentions a practical detail, not the way that would make most people look at her differently. She had signed on with the party for the company and the safety of numbers. She was headed for a town called Hollowbrook, 4 days south, where an older human woman by the name of Nell Ives ran a dry goods store on the corner by the smithy. Nell had written a letter the summer before to the notice board at the Cindervale Trading Hall saying that she needed a partner who could keep books and was not afraid of long hours. Serka had answered by post. Nell had answered back. The arrangement was that Serka would show up when she could, and if the shop suited her and she suited the shop, they would work out the shape of the partnership then. Nell was 71 years old and did not have time for anything that was not simple. That was where Serka was going. Another 4 days. Maybe 5 if the weather turned again. Harlan brought the 12 into the south pasture while she watered the mule. He did it slowly. Every one of them let him. The big sorrel favored her leg but put weight on it, which was the thing to watch. He stood in the pasture for a while after he had shut the gate, just looking at them. At all 12 of them. At the fact of them being there when an hour ago he had decided they were gone. He turned around and Serka was still standing by the trough, watching him watch the horses. "You are welcome to water yourself as well," he said. "I would take some coffee," she said, "if it is not trouble." "It is not," he said. She stayed for supper because he asked her to, and because the light was already going, and there was no good reason to push a mule 4 more hours in the cold when there was a barn and a warm stove available. That was the practical version. The true version included the fact that he asked her twice before she agreed. And the way she looked at the barn before she looked at the house told him she was making sure the animals would be all right before she thought about herself. He made what he had, which was not much. Salt pork. Cornbread. The last of a jar of pickled beets he had been saving. For no particular reason. She ate everything and did not comment on it one way or the other, which he respected. Some people made a performance of eating plain food, especially those who had not expected plain food. She did not. She ate the way she rode, without complaint and without fuss. They sat at the kitchen table after, and she drank coffee, and he drank coffee, and they talked about the horses, mostly. The condition of the upper pasture, whether he had had horses scatter before in a storm, how long they had stayed out. He told her about the breeding program, what he was working toward with the bloodlines. The mare he had paid too much for 8 years earlier and had never regretted. The stallion he had bought as a 2-year-old and had grown into the animal he had hoped for. She listened the way a person listens who is not waiting for a chance to speak. When she asked a question, it was the question a person asked who already had a good picture and wanted to check the last piece of it. She asked him about the piece, not the paper of it, the living of it. Whether the ranchers on the ridge behind him had traded easy with Orc holds up the fork before the storm and this bad stretch. What the Concord Marshal was like these days. Whether old Sam Wren was still keeping the feedlot at the foot of the switchback. She asked those the way a person asks who is measuring what a place would be like to work in for a long time, and Harlan noticed this without commenting on it. Around the 3rd cup of coffee, he asked her where she had learned horses. She looked at the table. "My grandfather ran a small herd on the north side of Ashgate before the last of the northern holds thinned out," she said. "He took me on the trails with him from the time I could sit a saddle by myself. He was patient. He said if a horse ever did not want to do something a person had asked, the person was almost always wrong. My grandmother kept the ledgers for the trading between our hold and the 2 human settlements on the south side of the pass. I sat at her elbow from the time I could hold a pen. Between the 2 of them, they raised me to see things I did not always know I was seeing. Are they still there?" he said. "They passed within a year of each other," she said. 4 winters back. That was when I started thinking about coming south." He nodded. He looked at his own cup. Elisa's ledger was on the corner of the desk in the front room. He could see it from where he sat. 15 years in the same spot. He had not opened it in 8. He did not open it that evening either, but he was aware of it the way a man is aware of a door he has left closed for a long time, and has just remembered is a door. Serka slept in the small back room he used for storing tack in the winter. He cleared the bridles off the cot and put clean blankets down. She slept the whole way through the night with the specific completeness of a person who had been on a mule since dawn. Harlan slept better than he had in a week, which surprised him and did not surprise him at all. She was in the barn before he was in the morning. When he came down the porch step with his coffee, he saw the barn door already open a crack and heard her voice, low and steady, saying something quiet to the sorrel mare. He stood in the yard for a moment and listened without going in. Then he pushed the door. She was crouched in the stall with her hand flat against the mare's shoulder. She had cut fresh cloth from an old flour sack and had it soaking in a bucket of warm water beside her. The bucket had a small handful of what looked like willow bark and a pinch of something darker in the bottom. She looked up when he came in. "The swelling is down a finger," she said. "I would rest her another day at least. She is not going to founder, but she should not be moved." "I was going to ask you to stay another day," he said. She looked at him, then at the mare, then at the bucket. "All right," she said. They did not talk much through that day. He cleaned the tack she had shifted off the cot and rehung it. She spent the morning in the barn, checked all 12 of the horses one by one, walked the perimeter of the south pasture along the fence line looking at the ground, came back and said, "You have a soft spot in the southeast corner where the runoff has cut a shallow ditch under the wire. Horses will find that in the spring." He walked out with her to look at it. She was right. He said he would fix it before the melt. She said, "I will help if I am here that long." He said, "You will not be. Not casually, just plainly." And she nodded, plainly, and they walked back to the barn. Before we go on, if this story is finding you somewhere warm tonight, do one small thing. Write in the comments which town the winter finds you in. Not the big one you drive to on the weekend, the one where the porch light is on. I want to see the map of you. Now, back to the barn and the mare and a 53-year-old rancher who was starting to notice things he had not been noticing. At supper that second evening, Serka set her fork down halfway through the meal and said, "Do you keep books?" Harlan looked at her. "I keep them," he said. "I do not know that I keep them well. Would you mind if I looked at them?" He thought about that. He thought about Elise. He thought about how long it had been since anyone other than Elise had asked to look at his books, which was never. He thought about the fact that this orc woman had ridden his 12 horses down out of a box canyon and had asked to look at his ledger the way another woman might ask to help with the washing up. He said, "I would not mind." He got Elise's ledger book off the corner of the desk in the front room. He got his own out of the desk drawer. He set both of them on the kitchen table. He said, "The one on top is my current. The one underneath was my wife's. She has been gone 15 years, but she was better at this than I have ever been. The pages she wrote may still tell you something about how the ranch is built, though the numbers are old." Serka looked at the 2 books. She did not touch Elise's for a moment. Then she said, "Would you like me to leave that one on the desk?" Harlan looked at the book. He looked at Serka. "No," he said. She would have wanted somebody to open it. It has been long enough. Serka opened his current ledger first. She read for an hour and a half in silence. She did not ask a single question. She turned pages. She followed columns with the tip of a pencil she had taken from her satchel. Once she wrote a small mark in the margin of one page and looked up, apologetic. He said, "Mark anything you want." She went back to reading. When she was done with his current, she opened Elise's. She read that one differently. Slower, the way a person reads a letter from someone they never met but have heard about. When she finished, she closed both books and sat back in the chair and looked at Harlan across the table. "There are 3 things," she said. He waited. "Your feed contract," she said. "Old Sam Wren is a good man, but the contract you have with him for the winter grain is the contract he offered you 8 years ago and has not been renegotiated. The price on that grain has come down twice at the Concord Fair since. You are paying above the current basin rate for a service you could get at the current basin rate. Sam would not fight you on it. You would have to ask him. Second thing, your bank at Garrowells is charging you a fee per transaction that I have not seen anywhere else in the basin. It is small on its own. Over a year, it is not small. If you moved your accounts to the Peace Cooperative at Silverfoot Landing, you would keep more of what you take in. Third thing, your breeding schedule for the mares." She said this carefully. "You are breeding the young mares in their 2nd full year. That was standard practice 20 years ago. It is still standard practice on this side of the ridge among the human ranchers, and I am not telling you it is wrong. But the northern holds have been breeding at the 3rd full year for a generation, and my grandfather's records showed larger, sounder foals from the older first mothers, and lower loss on the mares themselves through the birth. If you held your youngest string back 1 year, you would take a small loss in the year you held them. In the 2nd year, and every year after, you would come out ahead." She stopped talking. She put her hands flat on the table beside the books. She looked at Harlan the way a person looks who has said what they came to say and is prepared to hear that they have overstepped. Harlan looked at her. He looked at the 2 ledgers on the table between them. He looked at his wife's hand on the older pages, the neat brown ink, the way she had written a lowercase g. He looked back at Serka. "3 things," he said. "3 things. You read all that in an hour and a half." "I read your current in the first 40 minutes, she said. "I spent the rest of the hour with hers. Because I wanted to know what she saw before I said what I saw. She saw the feed contract in the 8th year. She wrote a note in the margin. I do not know if you have looked at that page recently." He had not. He got up. He walked around the table. He looked at the page Serka had marked. Elisa's hand in the margin. Feed contract review needed this coming spring. Hurry. The page was dated the 2nd month of the year she died. She had never gotten to the spring. Harlan sat down slowly in the chair beside Serka. He did not say anything for a while. She waited. "I have been paying too much for 8 years, he said, "because I never opened her book after." "That is understandable," Serka said. "It does not mean it should keep costing you." He looked at Serka in the lamplight. 29 days out of Cindervale, bound for a dry goods store 4 days further south, wearing a hat that was not hers, had ridden his 12 horses out of a box canyon and worked a sorrel mare out of a rock crack slow and easy, and then come to his front yard and asked, "These yours?" "Thank you," he said. She nodded once. Then she got up and cleared her plate to the sink and washed it and left it in the drying rack and said good night. She was in the tack room with the door closed inside of 2 minutes. Harlan sat at the kitchen table for another hour, with both ledgers open in front of him and Elisa's marginal note under his hand. She stayed a 3rd day and a 4th. Not because he asked, exactly, he did not have to ask. On the 3rd morning he came down to find her already at the fence line in the southeast corner with a set of pliers and a coil of new wire and the beginnings of a proper patch on the soft spot the horses were going to find in the spring. He walked out with a 2nd pair of pliers without a word and worked the wire from the other side. They finished at midday. She washed her hands at the pump and said, "I should have started south by now." He said, "You should have." She said nothing else about it. On the 4th day, she rewrote his current ledger for the past 3 months, cleanly, in a small hand that was neither Elisa's nor his own. so that the pages he had let get messy through the storm week and the search for the horses were suddenly clear again. She did it at the kitchen table with the pencil she had brought from her satchel. When she was done, she showed him what she had done. She said, "You are keeping good numbers, you are just keeping them roughly. That is a different problem than not keeping them. That evening," she said, "I will leave in the morning. Nell will be wondering. I told her by post I would be there by the 3rd week of the month, and the 3rd week is next week." Harlan nodded. He did not say anything else. He wanted to say a great deal. He said none of it. He did not sleep that night. He sat in the front room with the lamp low and thought about a great many things, and about Elise, and about a woman he had known for 4.5 days who was going to be gone in the morning to a dry goods store 4 days south. He thought about asking her to stay. He thought about the specific arithmetic of a 53-year-old rancher with bad knees and a good year ahead of him if he moved his bank and his feed contract and held his mares another season. Asking a 29-year-old Orc woman who had signed a partnership with a woman in Hollowbrook by post 6 months earlier and who kept her word by nature and had ridden 29 days to keep it, to break that word on account of him. He did not ask. She was gone before he was up. She had left a note on the kitchen table in the same clean small hand as the rewritten ledger. It said, "Thank you for the room. Watch the sorrel another 2 days on that leg. The east fence patch will hold until spring, but I would run new wire along the top run when the ground thaws. Post office in Hollowbrook if you need to reach me. Serka Voren." He picked the note up. He held it. He put it in the drawer of the desk beside Elise's ledger. He went out to the barn. Sam Wren rode over 3 days later on his own account, not knowing that anything had changed at the Bramwell place. Harlan brought the contract out and asked plainly. Sam looked at it. Sam looked at Harlan. Sam said, "You have been overpaying me for 6 years, and I did not have the honesty to bring it up. Come inside. We will fix it now." They fixed it at Sam's kitchen table with a fresh contract and a handshake. Sam gave him back a portion of the current year's overage against the next season's grain. He was not a man who cheated. He was a man who had let a good arrangement stay a good arrangement past its date. That was the whole of it. Harlan rode over to Silverfoot Landing the next week and opened accounts at the Peace Cooperative. The old bank at Garrow Wells was unhappy. He did not care. He rode home with a fresh book of cooperative drafts in his saddlebag and the specific relief of a man who has done a thing he should have done 6 years earlier. He held the young mares back that season. 2 of them. The others he bred as planned. He told himself, in the pasture with the mares, that he was doing this on his wife's ledger note and Serka Voren's cold reading of what a wife had marked, and no other reason. He told himself that in the barn at night when the wind was up, and the specific quiet of a house that had been quiet for a long time settled in behind him at the kitchen table. 9 days after she left, Serka came back. The days between her leaving and her return were a particular kind of 9 days for both of them. She would not tell him about hers until much later. She had ridden the mule south down the fork trail in the specific way of a person keeping a promise, and had thought about a 53-year-old rancher and about a ledger that had been closed for 8 years and about a note in Elise Bramwell's hand for the first 3 of those days. She had reached Hollowbrook on the 4th day. Hollowbrook was smaller than Garrow Wells and older. A single street, 5 wooden buildings, a smithy at one end, and Nell Ives's dry goods stored 2 doors down from the smithy. Nell was standing in the doorway with her arms folded when Serka rode up. Nell was 71, small, iron-haired, 1 glass eye from a childhood fever, and had been running the store alone for 8 years since her husband had passed. She had known 1 Orc in her life before Serka, a trader out of Cindervale who had come down twice a year for 20 years for salt and sugar and the fine white flour the Ironmoor did not make. Nell did not fuss over Serka's arrival. She said, "You made better time than I expected. Come inside. We will look at what needs doing." They looked at what needed doing for 2 days. It was real work. The store had been kept but not kept well. Nell was tired. The ledgers were behind. There was a full room of unopened crates from a spring shipment that Nell had not had the strength to sort. The rooms above the shop were clean and warm. Nell said, "I can pay you fair. I can teach you what I know. In 2 years, if it works, half the shop is yours. Serka, read the terms." The terms were more than fair. Nell was a good woman. Serka slept the second night above the shop and did not sleep well. She got up before first light and made coffee in the store's small back kitchen and stood at the small back window looking out at the Ironmoor sky going gray to blue over the roofs of Hollowbrook, and she thought about it plainly, the way she thought about everything. She thought about Nell, who was a good woman and needed help and had offered a fair partnership. She thought about a store in a small town where she would keep books and stock crates and grow into an owner over 2 seasons and probably would have a good life. She thought about a 53-year-old rancher on the Sulphur Creek Fork who kept his wife's ledger on the corner of the desk for 15 years and had never opened it, and who had opened it the night she asked. She thought about a sorrel mare in a rock crack. She thought about a note on a kitchen table. She thought about it for the length of a cup of coffee. And then she took another cup out onto the small back stoop and drank it, and then she went inside and packed her saddlebag, and then she went and found Nell, who was already up. Serka said, "Nell, I have to tell you something." Nell looked at her. Nell had run a store alone for 8 years and had raised 3 children before that, 2 of whom were still living. Nell knew the shape of a young woman with a decision made before the words came out. "You are not staying," Nell said. "I would like to stay 4 days more," Serka said, "if you will let me. I want to help you with the shipment. I want to leave you the ledger caught up. And I want to write you a letter to a woman I know in Cindervale who kept my grandmother's shop for years and is looking for what you are offering. I think she would come in the spring." Nell looked at her for a long moment. Nell had a face that showed very little. Then Nell said, "You met somebody on the way." "I met somebody on the way," Serka said. Nell smiled a small dry smile. Nell said, 4 days is fine. Then you go." Serka stayed the 4 days. She worked hard. She sorted the shipment. She caught the ledgers up. She wrote the letter to Cindervale in her cleanest hand, and Nell signed it, and Nell mailed it with the postwriter the morning Serka left. Nell walked out to the smithy corner with her and said, "You be careful of him. You be careful of yourself, and if it does not work out, this door is here." "Thank you," Serka said. She rode north. 4 days back up the fork. She thought about it the whole way. On the 4th day she came up the switchback trail to Harlan Bramwell's place in the middle of the afternoon, on the same gray mule with the same duster coat and the same hat sitting low on her ears, and she rode into the front yard and stopped the mule at the porch step and swung down. Harlan came out of the barn when he heard the hooves. He walked into the yard. He stopped 10 feet from where she was standing. "Serka," he said. "Harlan," she said. She reached into the inner pocket of her duster and took out a folded piece of paper. She stepped forward and held it out to him. He took it. He unfolded it. It was in her clean small hand. 3 items, she said, not to make it complicated, to make it plain. He looked at the paper. 1. Fair pay for room and board while I am here, at basin rate for a hired hand and no more, because I do not want to owe or be owed on that count. 2. Partnership on decisions about the ledger and the breeding string, since I am the reason the ledger is going to change this year, and I do not want to be responsible for what I cannot help decide. 3. My own room. The tack room in winter, if that is what is available. My own room in whatever season. This is not a negotiation on that point. I need a door I can close." Harlan read the paper. He read it again. He looked at her. "You came back," he said. "No, we'll manage," she said. "She will have someone by spring." "I wrote her a letter to a friend of my grandmother's who is a better fit than I am." Nell agreed. She looked at the paper in his hand. "Are the terms all right?" she said. He looked at the paper, then at her. "They are the correct terms," he said. "I would have offered less because I would not have wanted to presume. The terms, as you have written them, are the right ones. Come inside." She untied the mule. He helped her carry her bag to the tack room. She had brought a small bundle of things from Hollowbrook. A tin of tea Nell had pressed on her. A wooden box for pens. A folded shawl the color of wood smoke that she said had belonged to her grandmother. That evening at the kitchen table she opened his current ledger and laid the 3 items on the top page and wrote them into the front of the book in the same clean hand as the rewritten pages, and she signed her name and dated it and slid the book across the table for him to sign. He signed. The Ironmoor spring was still 6 weeks off, but the arithmetic had shifted. The Ironmoor spring came in the 4th week of the 4th month, as it always did, with the melt coming down the Silverfoot Fork so hard it took out the low bridge at the 3rd crossing and made the trail into Garrow Wells a 2-day ride instead of a 1-day for the whole of the 5th month. Harlan and Serka did not ride into town during that month. They did not need to. Sam Wren came up with the fresh grain contract signed and a promise to hold at that price for 2 years. The Peace Cooperative sent a rider with the papers to move the last of Harlan's accounts. 2 of the young mares stood the season without being bred, and Harlan watched them in the small pasture and thought about how easy it had been to change a thing he had been doing wrong for 20 years, once someone had said it plainly. They fell into the shape of a working partnership without much discussion. She took the barn and the ledger and the correspondence. He took the fences and the cattle and the outer pastures. They met at breakfast and at supper. They discussed what needed discussing without any of the specific difficulty that discussions had had in the house when he had been alone with them. She had her own room. The tack room in the 5th month while the weather was still cold at night. In the 6th month, when the heat came, he cleared the small east bedroom that had been his mother's before Elisa's time, and he told her it was hers if she wanted it. She looked at the room. She said, "Would it bother you if I put a table under the window?" He said, "It is your room." She put a table under the window and sat at it in the evenings and wrote letters. To Nell, to a cousin in Cindervale, to an aunt at the northern edge of the Ironmoor who had raised her after her grandparents. Harlan did not read what she wrote and did not ask, but he heard the pen from across the hall on some evenings, and he heard the small pause where a person stopped to think, and he understood that a room in his house was being lived in for the first time in 15 years, and he sat in his own room and did not name the thing that named itself. The summer went well. The best summer the ranch had had in 6 years. 2 of the middle mares dropped good foals in the 5th month. The sorrel from the Box Canyon, who had been the one Serka had worked out of the crack, came into heat again in the 6th and stood for the stallion and settled to foal in the following February. Serka named her Bramble, though the sorrel was Harlan's animal. He did not correct her on it. It suited the mare. The name stuck. They rode into Garrow Wells together for the first time in the middle of the 6th month, on a supply run that had been overdue for 2 weeks. Harlan had put the trip off longer than he should have, and both of them knew why he had, and neither of them named it. Serka simply said, at breakfast on a Tuesday, "We need salt and we need lamp oil, and I would like to send a package to my aunt at Ashgate." Harlan said, "All right." She said, "All right." And they hitched the wagon. Garrow Wells was a small town, but not a small enough town to miss 2 people driving into it together. Serka sat on the wagon box beside him with her hands folded in her lap, wearing a plain, dark work dress and the same battered hat that had been hers since the switchback morning, and she did not look at anybody except with the mild, polite attention of a person who had decided in advance that she would be looking at everybody the same way. Harlan drove. He knew every face on the main street. He knew who was going to stare and who was going to pretend not to, and who was going to say something to somebody else that he would hear about at the next Concord Fair. None of that mattered. He drove to the general store. He set the brake. He handed Serka down. He said low, before they went in, Mara Blackwell keeps a shop 2 doors up on the right. Fabric and small goods. She is the reason I brought the wagon this way instead of the North Road. She was a friend of the last Orc woman who lived in this town, and she is the closest thing to a decent welcome that Garrow Wells has to offer. I would like you to meet her. Serka looked at him. She said, all right. Mara came out of her shop when she saw them. She was small, iron-haired, 62 years old, and had watched the second reading of the piece signed with her own eyes as a girl. She had known Vesa Whitewake for 18 years before Vesa died. She had held Oshka's hand in the churchyard the following spring, and had given Oshka her mother's papers a year later, and had sat in the front pew at Oshka's wedding to a rancher named Corin Vale in the 3rd month before this one. She looked at Serka. She looked at Harlan. She looked at Serka again. Mara said, you are Serka Voren. Serka said, I am. How do you know? Word travels, Mara said. Also, my grandson works for Sam Wren, and Sam Wren has a specific way of describing a person that saves me the guessing. Come inside, both of you. I have tea and I have salt and I have a lot of gossip I have been saving for the right ear. Harlan looked at Mara. He said, thank you. She said, you are welcome. She said it to him, but she was looking at Serka. Serka understood. Serka went inside. They stayed at Mara's shop for the better part of an hour. Harlan bought salt and lamp oil. Serka sent her package to Ashgate from Mara's counter, and Mara waved off the postage the way an old woman waves off a debt that was never anybody's in the first place. Mara and Serka got along in the specific way of 2 women who had both had to build their standing in a small town from nothing, and had done it by being quietly right about a lot of things over a long time, and did not need to say very much to know one another. When Harlan and Serka left, Mara walked out to the wagon and put her hand on Serka's arm briefly and said, you come see me any time. I mean that. The door is open. Serka said, thank you. She meant it. Mara nodded. Mara went back inside. They rode home in the long light of a 6-month afternoon and did not talk about it for a mile. Then Serka said, quietly, she reminded me of my grandmother. I thought she might, Harlan said. Serka looked at the road ahead. That was the kindest thing you have done for me since the ledger, she said. Harlan said, it was overdue. Serka reached over. She put her hand on his forearm briefly. She took it back. He kept driving. But he thought about her hand on his forearm the rest of the way home, and he understood, in the way a man understands things without having to name them, that some doors do not need much of a push. Old Sam Wren rode over in the 7th month to deliver a load of hay, and he sat on the porch with Harlan and Serka and drank a glass of the buttermilk Serka had put up that week, and Sam looked at Harlan and said, you look 10 years younger. Bramwell, whatever it is, keep doing it. Serka went inside to bring out more buttermilk, and Sam looked at Harlan and said, lo, she is a good one. Do not be a fool about it. Harlan said, I am trying not to be. Sam said, try harder, and rode home. Tom Halder came through in the 8th month on his way to the Concord Fair with a small string of his own. He was one of the ranchers on the far ridge, and he had known Harlan for 30 years and had never in that time set foot inside the Bramwell house because Harlan had not asked. Serka asked him to supper. He stayed. He and Serka got along the way certain plain-spoken people get along without much overhead. When he rode out in the morning, he said to Harlan at the gate, "So, it is like that." Harlan said, "It is not like that." Tom Halder said, "You are a bad liar, Harlan, always were," and rode off. The Concord Marshal came through on his fall circuit in the 9th month. He stayed one night. He remarked on the ledger and asked to see the breeding records for the Peace Registry, which had asked all border ranches to keep clearer records on cross-basin sales. Serka had the records in a folder tied with a green ribbon. He looked at them. He said, "This is the tidiest set I have seen this circuit." He looked at Harlan. "Congratulations," he said, without saying on what. He rode on. Autumn came, and the valley went golden, and the aspens on the upper slopes turned and then dropped, and the cold started moving back in from the north. Harlan put up enough hay. The horses were in good condition going into winter. The ledger was better than it had been in the whole of the last 6 years. He knew it was better because Serka had said so at supper twice, both times plainly, both times to make sure he saw it. He also knew it was better because he had looked at it himself, in the front room, in the lamplight, one evening in the last week of the 9th month, when Serka was in the barn, and he had the house to himself. He sat at the desk for a long time. Elisa's ledger was still on the corner of the desk. Beside it, in the same neat brown ink Elise had used, a small piece of paper Serka had put there in the 8th month, a note that said, "In the same hand as the rewritten pages, I moved her book 2 inches to the left, so I could set the newer records book next to it. Move it back if you want." He had left it. The 2 books sat side by side now, Elisa's on the left, the current on the right. It was where they belonged. He got up. He went to find Serka. She was in the barn, checking on Bramble. The sorrel was 6 weeks off her fall. Serka had the lantern on the hook, and she was standing at the stall door looking in, arms folded on the top rail, patient. The mare looked back at her. They had developed a relationship, those two. Bramble had been wary of Serka in the beginning, the way mares are with strangers, and Serka had simply waited her out. Showed up every evening, stood at the rail, did not push. After about 3 weeks, the mare had walked to the rail on her own, and Serka had held her hand out flat and let the mare decide. After that, they had been easy with each other. Harlan stood in the barn door for a moment, watching her before she heard him. "How is she doing?" he said. "Good," Serka said. "She is restless but not worried. Another few weeks." He came and stood next to her at the rail. "I looked at the books," he said. She looked at him. "The year," he said, "what the year did." She waited. "You were right," he said, "about all 3 things. The grain contract, the fees, the mares, all 3. She nodded. "Not I told you. Not any satisfaction in it, just yes, that is what the numbers said." "We are in the black," he said. "Actually in the black. Not barely. Not if you count it a certain way. Actually," she was quiet for a moment. "Good 22 years," he said. "I have never had a year that looked like this one." She turned to look at him then, and she had that straight look, but there was something else in it too. Something warm. "You have been doing most of the right things for a long time," she said. "You just needed the rest of the picture." He looked at her in the lantern light. 53 years old. Bad knees. A ranch he had nearly lost twice. Standing in a barn in the 9th month with an Orc woman who had ridden 29 days to get here and then had ridden 9 days south and had come back when she did not have to. Who had read his ledgers in 3 evenings and had seen what was there. Who had stood at a mare's rail every evening for 3 weeks until the mare had decided to trust her. "You came back," he said. It was not what he had planned to say, it was just what was there. She knew what he meant. "Of course I did," she said. like it was simple, like it had never been in question. He reached out. He tucked a piece of hair back from her face where it had come loose from the braid, and she let him. And she looked at him with those amber eyes. "You came back 9 days later with a list," he said. She smiled, the real one, not just the corner of her mouth. "3 items," she said. "That is not a list. That is a plan." He laughed. She laughed. And Bramble looked at the two of them like they were being foolish, and maybe they were. He thinks about that morning a lot now. The cold coffee. The trail. Watching nothing. The way his body went ahead of his mind when he heard them coming. 12 horses. And behind them a woman on a gray mule who did not know him, who had her own place to be, who stopped in his yard and said, "These yours?" And then, when he could not put a sentence together, just told him straight that the mare was going to be fine. He had built the ranch up from raw ground, lost it down to almost nothing and built it back. Kept it going through years when keeping it going was the whole job. All of it. Nothing left over for anything else. And he had gotten very good at believing the arithmetic he decided on. That he was the kind of man who got a certain amount and then no more. That the valley's quiet opinion of him was probably close enough to right. That the back room where he kept what he had stopped letting himself want was properly closed, and he did well to leave it closed. Serka did not believe that arithmetic. She looked at what was there, the horses, the ground, the ledger, the work, the years of it, and she said, "You built something." And she meant it. Not to be kind, because it was true. She said, "Those people are wrong about you." And she did not say it to make him feel better. She said it because she had spent 5 days watching, and she had seen what she had seen. She rode 9 days south to Hollowbrook, and 9 days back not because he asked her to, but because she decided on her own, in her own way, that this was the place. And he was who she was going to stay with. He used to wonder sometimes why she came back. He knew why she had told him why plainly, the way she said everything. She wanted something that was still becoming something. She did not want a room she had already figured out. But he had meant the other part of it, the part underneath. Why him specifically? This particular ranch. This particular worn-out man with the bad arithmetic and the back room full of things he had stopped wanting. There were other ranches in the basin. Other men in that valley who needed a good woman and probably deserved one. Why come back to the one who could not find his own horses in a storm? He had come to think the answer was the horses themselves, not the ones he had lost. The whole string. The 11 years of careful decisions about which animal to breed, to which, and what you would get if you thought it through properly. She had seen that. She had looked at those animals in the south pasture, and she had seen 11 years of a person staying with a thing, seeing it clearly, making good decisions even when the surrounding circumstances were bad. You could not fake a good horse. You could fake a lot of things. Not that. And she had known how to read what she was looking at. She had seen him in the horses before she had seen him in much else. He had come to think that was a fine way to be known. She was married to him by the 3rd month of the following year. It was a small ceremony. Old Sam Wren gave her away, which surprised him and pleased him. Tom Halder came down from the ridge with his wife. Nell Ives came up from Hollowbrook in a hired trap with the woman from Cindervale who was now her partner, and the Cindervale woman turned out to be a fine, easy person who made Serka laugh in the way old family made her laugh. Nell held Serka's hands in the yard after the ceremony and said, "Lo." So only Serka heard. "I told you if it did not work out the door would be open. It is still open. It looks like you will not need it." Serka said, "No," she said, "come see me." Nell said, "I will." Bramble foaled in the 2nd month, in the deep cold, in the way the sorrel had always been going to. Serka was in the barn with her when it happened. Harlan came out from the house before dawn when he heard the barn door open on its own hinges the way it did when Serka moved through it in a hurry. He came in with his coat over his shoulders and the lantern in his hand, and found Serka on her knees in the straw beside Bramble, and Bramble on her feet with the specific concentration of a mare who was about to be done with the whole business, and a wet dark foal on the floor between them beginning the ancient work of finding out what its legs were for. Serka looked up at Harlan. Her face was tired and happy in the way of a person who had been up since 2 a.m. and who had watched a good thing happen. "Filly," she said. Harlan looked. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he crouched down in the straw beside her and looked at the filly. Small, bay, a white star on the forehead. A long dark tail already twitching against a leg it did not yet know how to move. "She is going to be a good one," he said. "She is going to be a great one," Serka said. "Look at the shoulder." Harlan looked at the shoulder. They stayed in the barn together for another hour while the filly worked out standing and finding the milk. Serka wiped the mare's flanks down with clean sacking. Harlan brought fresh straw. They did not talk much. There was nothing to say that the filly and the mare were not already saying between them. Around first light, Serka stood up and stretched the small of her back and looked at Harlan and said, "We should name her." He looked at the filly. Then at Serka. "You name her," he said. She looked at the filly for a long moment. "Elise," she said, "if you would let me." Harlan looked at her. He looked at the filly. He looked at the mare who had been in a rock crack the morning Serka had come down out of the switchback with 12 horses in front of her. He looked at his wife of 11 months, standing in the straw beside a filly she wanted to name for a woman she had never met and had read in a ledger. "Yes," he said, "that is her name." The filly took her first proper step on the same word. They stood in the barn until the sun came up over the ridge and the light came in through the high window and lit the straw gold. Serka took his hand. He took hers back. They walked out of the barn together into the second-month morning with the light behind them and the filly named after his first wife nursing quietly at her mother's side in the stall behind them, and Harlan thought, without any particular drama about it, that this was what an answered life looked like. It looked like this. The feed merchant called him steadfast last week. Used the word exactly. Harlan had to think about it on the ride home. Where it had come from. Whether it fit. 22 years on this ground. 2 bad stretches and 2 recoveries. The horses he had kept building toward through both. Steadfast, maybe, or just too stubborn to understand when the arithmetic said stop. Serka had been right about that too. It was the same thing, depended on whether it worked out. The lamp in the barn window burns steady. That is what Harlan sees from where he is sitting now on the porch step with a cup of coffee that is still warm. A good woman sitting with a horse that is close to her time again, this time the daughter, doing the patient work. Because the patient work is what it takes. In the morning there will be another foal or there will not. And if there is, Serka will tell him about it at breakfast with that particular look she has when something has gone right. Just her eyes, mostly. She does not make a production of it. She never did. Harlan Bramwell was 53 years old when a woman rode down out of the switchback with 12 horses in front of her and did not know what she was starting. He was 53 when he decided the arithmetic did not work anymore. He was 53 when he found out it worked fine, given the right rest of the picture. He is going to go out to that barn now, and stand next to her in the lantern light, and watch what happens next. That is the whole of it. Before we close, one small question. If you have been sitting with this story tonight, tell me in the comments. Who is the person in your life who read your ledger and told you plainly what you had been paying too much for, or what you had been keeping closed too long, or what you had been doing right and had not been letting yourself see? It does not have to be a spouse. It can be a friend, a neighbor, a stranger who came down out of a switchback one morning. I read every comment. I read them slowly, the way Harlan read the note Elise wrote in the margin. More than once. And if you have not already, subscribe, turn on the bell. Stay a while. The hearth here always keeps a cup for you.